Africa. Thank you. Moved on to Africa, worked on an education in Morocco as well as in India, capacity building, also in verifiable credentials here in Brazil, both in rural credit, and we started working on age verification. So with this background, I bring in a unique perspective of my insights and challenges and opportunities that we see with verifiable credentials, right? So I come from the digital public infrastructure domain, right? We started working on verifiable credentials in the last couple of years across India, even in Brazil here. So this is my take on that. Just to take a step back and look at what we are talking about, right? So we're talking about documents being shared, right? So we went from a physical world where people would share their documents. Let's say if I've completed my education or my driving license or my passport or my ID, right? So all these documents are shared across with each other. Let's say I'm passing through an airport and international border, I will show my passport, move on, right? So they'll verify that it is issued by my government. They have a way to verify. There are some standards which are established internationally. Who is issuing these passports and how they have been verified, right? So I carry as a citizen this document with me and move around. Moving from there to a digital world where we are looking at it doing everything digital and online, right? So we have documents which are mostly converted into PDFs, or there are systems, applications built by people, enterprises, governments across the world, where you fill in a form, you get your document out as a PDF or anything else like that, with digital signatures, right? And probably with public key infrastructure, which is attached to it to give trust for that document, right? And then you share it with people or with organizations or with governments, right? Wherever you're doing these transactions. Now we are moving from a digital document to a verifiable credential, right? So it is a little more to what a regular PDF would do, right? We're talking to systems directly. We're talking about APS able to take this from a citizen, from an organization, and to pass this credential from one person or one organization to another in what are the transaction and what are the ecosystem or domain it has been passed. This is where we are evolving, right? So in the span of the yesterday and today, we spoke about all the standards, all the specifications of how these VCs are being built, right? Technology enables trust, but it doesn't bring the trust, right? So the governance is where the trust has been sustained, right? What we have done so far is that we know how to issue a credential, we know how to verify a credential, how to store a credential in wallets, right? How to exchange these credentials when I'm presenting to somebody, even we talk about how do we protect the data that we have in this credential, right? Is it cryptographically secured? Somebody is not misusing my data. How are you protecting the data of the citizens and all of that, right? So this is what the specification, standards, and technology talks about, and these questions are mostly addressed. And these standards and complaints are maturing day by day, right? We have heard from W3C Foundation and OpenID Foundation. They're talking about what they have already published, what are the next working groups, next aspects of these verifiable credentials they're improving on, what they're building and all of that, right? So it's a continuous exercise for a tech side of the world. But the real questions are on bringing trust, right? And that technology won't bring that to the whole aspect, right? So there are questions on who is, I think Claudia also mentioned that, right? Who is bringing this trust, or who is issuing these credentials, right? We need to know who are the legitimate institutions or persons or businesses or universities who are issuing these certificates. We need to know them, right? Because there is a whole spectrum of fraud that can happen or misuse that could happen, right? All the data that is being shared. So you need to address those questions while you're looking at that, right? That's where the trust comes, right? Not by default by implementing a BC credential, whether I'm compliant to W3C or OpenID Foundation specifications. They would bring the tech capability to it, but not an institutional trust which everybody can exchange themselves. So Once we understand the specs and part of it, the tech part of it, we also need to know how data is being passed, right? So that's where the data models come into picture, where what are the data that we are sharing with each other, the credential that we are sharing with each other. We also need to understand what these data means to us, right? So we need to understand the semantics of it, right? If I'm sharing my ID, am I sharing my address where I live in? Am I sharing my date of birth? Am I sharing my gender? All of these details, right? You need to understand the data that is being shared. This is very simple. ID looks very simple, and it's if you read it, you'll understand it. But what about things like financial data, right? You're looking at bank statements, transactions, business invoices, and all of that, right? So it's not human readable, right? You would take, if you have to read some 1 GB of data, it will take ages to read it, right? So you need systems to understand. So that's where the data modeling and all of that will come into it. And each country will have their own specification, right? How the tax records are built is different from each country and each continent. So that's where the data modeling and all of that maturity has to happen. So when that specific domain and specific country, these kind of exercises happen, especially with verifiable credentials, there needs to be a work that needs to happen on defining these semantics, right? You need to understand what we are sharing with each other so that you can present a credential, but you also need to understand what the credential means, right? You have to know whether it is a farmer data that you're looking at, or whether it is a crop data that you're looking at, whether it is a financial data that you're looking at, right? So this is also a very important area that we all need to look at. There needs to be debate on discussion on these aspects as well, right? So the trust is not, it's not one layer, right? So it is multiple layers. The technical trust, I think we have spoken about it, right? I think in VC's world, all the cryptography validations, and to know which issuer has done all of that. Technically, you manage the trust there. On the data level, I think once we understand what data is being exchanged with each other, the semantic trust is also established, but it's a mature model, right? So when you start with something, you start with basics, but eventually you mature so that you know all the data that you are passing, all of that. But the other trust is very important. The institutional trust, right? Who is issuing these credentials, right? Who is saying that is government certifying or is saying that he's the issuer, right? How do somebody participate in this ecosystem, right? Am I the right verifier to take all the data, right? Because you're end of the day, you're passing your data to somebody and saying, boss, do get me this service, right? You could be going to a bank, you could be going to a fintech organizations, or you could be going to non-financial organizations to get a loan. But you're passing your ID information, your financial information to that person and asking him to give you a loan, right? He's taking your data, right? And we all know how important data is today, right? People can exploit it. So we need to know the legitimacy of the participants in the ecosystem and the larger ecosystem. So you need to have guardrails, right? So you need to have a regulator sort of thing to manage this trust, right? You need to have opportunities for you to establish this trust. Only then, once all of these trusts come together, that's when citizen feels accessible, right? He will feel that it is his data is protected. Once he have that trust, then he will empowered. He's empowered to be included in that economic transaction and that economic ecosystem, right? Whether it is finance or even just a travel aspect of it, right? So that's where the ease of using those technologies come into picture, right? So there are different layers of trust and there are different maturities of trust, right? When you're looking at governance, you need to look at what you want to do now, what you want to pick up now, right? Just to understand, I think this Claudia also mentioned what are the different players and in the ecosystem. This is my take on that. So at the center, I think you would have the citizens who are looking at their data to be shared. But it's not just the citizens, right? It could be organizations like SMEs or large companies and all of that who are sharing their data. There are also governments, because governments hold a lot of data, right, of the citizens, right? It could be your identity data, your tax returns, your invoices of your businesses, everything. So there are issuers of these credentials from this ecosystem. There are verifiers who wants to verify this credential. There are wallet providers, right, where you hold this all the data into a wallet. and you have these PK authorities who give the legitimacy or sign in saying, was this guy is good, this data is good, right? And all of that. So the standard bodies where you pick up for a given domain, you have a lot of standard bodies which define all of these specifications about how do you interact, how do you interoperable, make it interoperable across all these players, right? How the data should be defined and all of that. So other than these, right? So there are your civil society and research and academia who also have to come and do these debates, figure out what is best, right? How to evolve this to the next level, right? So ecosystem is about participation, right? It's about a lot of collaboration in figuring out what works for that society, for that region, for that country, or for that particular domain. So this is not just technology, right? Technology, I think we have discussed already. Technologies are easy to build, right? Technologies come and go, right? Today we are talking about AI agents everywhere. So you don't know who is doing what technology, right? You just give them a prompt and they're doing something in the background, right? Yesterday, I think Omar was mentioning that more than half of our traffic is coming from the agents, right? Most of the times agents are not doing it for themselves, right? So there's some human prompt which is allowing them to start doing all of this in the background, right? So they could be agents doing on their own, but that's a different story. But you're delegating a lot of these to the agents, right? So you need to know how those guys are also part of the ecosystem, right? So while you're bringing governance and trust, right? So you could look at what you want to get out of that governance, right? You want the governance to enable the ecosystem, right? Not to control them, right? Because otherwise, the growth will not happen, right? So you want any ecosystem in any domain, you look for a potential of improvement of livelihoods of the citizen or improvement of the industry or find out new ways of doing things. You want that to open innovation for the people so that the market does the innovation, not they are not being stifled for innovation, right? So you want to have somebody to certify the legitimacy of each of these participants, not gatekeep them and saying, "Was you can't go or you can go," right? It's not it is not their wish, right? So it is about democratizing access so that everybody can participate. Access is more important, not restricting competition, right? Competition will then evolve into better opportunities for the business and also for the citizens at the end of the day. But it also needs to bring accountability, right? By bringing transparency of how their things are done, how your data is protected, how not in the closed doors, but it should be publicly accountable. Whatever could be done there, right? So a good ecosystem would exhibit these characters like a balanced public trust, right? Private innovation and open standards, and more about robust regulatory oversight, right? So this is what you would generally expect the governance and all of that to be. Moving on to our learnings from India, right? As all of you would know, many people have spoken about it. Aadhaar yesterday also, right? So these are flag post verifiable credential today. But when it started, it was not verifiable credential. It was about giving digital identity to people. And so far, I think we have done more than 1.4 billion identities already. What lessons we have from that experience? I think if you know Nandan Nilekani, who is our founder, chairman for Unique Identity Authority of India, who is the thing behind Aadhaar cards. He came from a tech background, right? So he was interested to build this IDs for India, and he has done all the tech and gone into it. But we stumbled upon a lot of legal cases about society and others players saying questioning on how are you legitimate to collect all of this data for across the population in India. The reason was there is no legal framework to do that, right? So it was the other way around, right? It was not governance and law, legalities, guidelines first, but it is tech first, and then we have to do everything later, right? There were cases in Supreme Court, where there were cases in different courts across the country. But then the law was passed within the country. There is a lot of deliberation, a lot of debate, what they can collect, what they can't collect, how it should be used, why it should not be used, not used in what use cases and all of that. So that experience tells us that the governance, legal aspects All of that has to come first before the technology is done, right? You could also do things in parallel, but it has its own maturity levels. So this is our learnings from it, right? Because why do we need such a legal framework to happen, right? You need to understand if there is a dispute, if there is a misuse, right? How do you handle that, right? If there is a grievance for a citizen or an issue with certain transaction, right? You need to know where to go, whom to comply, and how to get that resolved, right? Should I go to courts or should I go to a institution to get those resolved? All of these, right? So these have been our experiences in doing Aadhaar, right? Uh, it also raises things like who is issuing, right? So, there is a bill in our parliament to put UDAI as an organization to collect data for across the population, right? So this was done a little later, but it was done nonetheless, right? So all these questions of who has the right to issue, right to collect data, right? Who is allowed to consume this data, not just the citizen himself, right? Where does he can share this for what purpose, right? What are the who is liable if the data is misused, right? So who will resolve the disputes? These are all the things that we have learned, and these are the things that you should look at if you are looking at governance and legal aspects. Things like cryptographically issuing a credential is easy to do because it is tech, right? And bunch of tech guys can solve this problem over a period of time. But the hard questions are how will you enable trust? There are different players to enable trust, right? So there are states, there are institutions, there are other employers, and all of them who want to use this credential, but will they trust it, right? If I get an computer science certificate from a college which nobody knows, right? How will somebody from a different state or a different country knows how to trust it, right? So trust is something that has to be established from a governance point of view, right? So that's where a lot of work has to be done. It's not just a tech problem itself, right? Tech will enable the solution, right? It will enable the trust, but the trust come from a stamp, right, or a legality of it. So those are the lessons that we have found, and it takes time to establish that trust, right? So we have not started using Aadhaar everywhere right immediately after it has been issued, right? It took years for us to do it. Today without any concern in my head, I can use it to open a new bank account, open a new investment. I can go invest in US using my Aadhaar, right? I can do eKYC for myself using Aadhaar authentication and then start using it. But it is a journey, right? It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not going to happen in the same pace in every region of the world, right? Each community have their own learnings, have their own concerns, right? Once the trust is only established, then only the usage will happen.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I think
If you can.
Sure. I'm done. Actually, this is probably my last slide. Okay. So other questions that we need to look at is to look at who are the stakeholders that you're looking at, right? So it is citizens, organizations, but like I said, it is also AI agents who are going to do a lot of consumption. The questions that we need to look at governance is to look at saying, how are these agents using this data that is being available on the net, right? On behalf of somebody who is legally liable for any digital action that these agents do. These are the questions that we need to look at while you're framing these governance policies and legal aspects of it, right? So we need to move from systems. We moved from physical papers to digital documents, but you're also moving towards verifiable credentials, right? But verifiable credentials alone will not solve the problem because you need to bring in trust so that people use it across the board, right? In different ecosystems and different domains. So if you don't have legal framework to do it, governance to do it, it'll just become another passing cloud in another technology which is being used, right? If you want to keep it for a long time, use it for the right purpose. Bringing trust is what is enable it to sustain for a long period, right? Things will evolve over a period of time, but in order for it to sustain, you need to bring in the ecosystem trust, and that's where I land my presentation. Thank you.
Bom dia a todas e a todos.
Good morning.
Obrigado I would like to thank Anans for his wonderful insights. I think that it was very informative. All of us are talking about the same things. I remember Minister Ster, who's my boss, talking about building a trustworthy digital ecosystem because we are building a digital trust ecosystem that is bigger, more functional, with better governance, that is increasingly present and increasingly uh, trustworthy by everyone, by society in general. It's important to make a disclaimer here. I work at the Secretariat of State Government Transformation, which is an area within the Ministry of Management and Innovation intended to think about the future and help identify future trends. So I'm not a regulator. So I think that that gives me more freedom to reflect on this topic, talking about digital security. For over 25 years, this has been implemented by ITI, the Institute for Information Technology in Brazil, which has worked as a major framework for the legal security and technology security of documents issuance, of any digital documents. And of course, the security discussion is based on what we've learned from ITI. We have the PICs, we have the digital identities. So we are building a digital security ecosystem. And we have future vision where documents and information can be exchanged fully in an authenticated way, in a secure way. And our, I like to quote Leon Gibson, who says that future has already arrived. It's just poorly distributed. And it's true in one ecosystem where already happens, where signed information is exchanged at huge volumes with high reliability and is in the tax world. Tax collection. So when we have in Brazil the electronic invoices is basically signed information issued by someone who has credentials in a digital trust ecosystem where the information is securely transferred with data models and information exchange protocols. So this is this new world with that will change economy. It's poorly distributed then because it already exists in the particular case of tax collection. But what I think that what verifiable credential does in this new round to create new security layers are twofold. One is that it is now user centric due to the constitutional and legislative changes for data, individual data protection. It's important to recognize that each individual should have governance about their data. So sharing allowance or through a wallet, for example, is one of the key components to ensure those features. And in the midterm, our challenge is to think how this would work in larger ecosystems because it works in a closed, very big ecosystem, which is the text ecosystem in an end-to-end ecosystem. So what are the challenges we have for these future with bigger ecosystems? I believe that the path to get there involves identifying solutions we already have, the foundations for the legal the legal framework that we have public and private mechanisms of identity verification that can be considered this basic technological layer. We have challenges not just in the signatures in information security, but also how this information is structured. We have some clues from the tax authorities that maybe a sectorial authority might have some regulatory power to determine data models, standards, interoperability standards. So what we will probably do in the future is to continue to acknowledge the regulatory power of sectorial authorities by implementing credential rationale that will recognize who the issuers are, what is the data models to be used. So to some extent, this will still be managed by sectorial authorities. We need to realize that there are some sectors or industries that involve some regulation. So here's the first challenge. Who will be responsible for that? Some governments systems already do that. We have government authorities that involve different ministries to regulate information related to identity in Brazil, for example. There are several agencies that can standardize and validate those systems. Similarly to education and healthcare, there will be data models and also accountable or responsible authorities for that. So part of the challenge of proving that a person who signed a document is indeed that person is something that has been solved. But now the ability of each sector to organize information also needs to be adjusted. What might become a challenge is still to think, how can we achieve interoperability between different rationales and different industries that will allow data to be integrated in the midterm? Before we started this panel, we were talking about current challenges, and one of them is how can we regulate topics that are in current transformation, in constant transformation. This is like working with a moving target. You're trying to envision what is going to happen. You're trying to regulate something before it even exists. If you regulate too much, you restrict too much, or you lose control. So it's difficult to strike a balance between some sensible regulation versus blocking or preventing innovation. It's important also to provide trust. That's our current challenge in any regulatory level. So there are many disruptions in this area. I wonder how will be speed verification systems when we have fly-in vehicles. So we need to foresee things that don't exist yet. And that seems to be, despite of what Anand said, I believe that I disagree with what he says. He says that governance should come before technology, but I believe that in some cases, governance is evolutional, is something that will depend on constant learning and evolution. And maybe I'm talking about other panels, the digital ECA, the digital statute for protection of children and adolescents is something like this, but I'm not sure society has understood that because that involves tests, that involves test beds, that involves sandboxes, a regulatory environment that will develop mechanisms following some common background, but that's a new way of doing regulation. And we are still testing the waters to understand how we should do it. Of course, we have some international references, but I guess it involves this testing phase. There are two additional components I'd like to raise. First, any regulatory approach to build the future, to foresee the future, even if based on tests, we must have safeguards. It must have safe guardrails. It must have minimum verification criteria to ensure that what seems to be a temporary deregulation will not harm people, will not harm society in a way with no point of return. So we need to be flexible, but we need to have safeguards. And there is another point which relates to seeing that some of the barriers or some of the challenges we're going to have in governance, as Anand put very well, they will have technology components that can be foundational and they will come before. So part of the challenge of thinking about a end-to-end governance and having verifiable credentials among all entities involves thinking about how can that person prove that that person is himself or herself in this environment. Pierre presented a new standard of recognized entities. It's still a 1.0 version, it will still evolve, but the trails on which we're going to develop a governance system that will allow users to control their information in an ecosystem that has multi players that are recognized and validated, that go beyond information security, that ensure interoperability, that allows automation and digital economy to take place. Seems to me that as we move forward in governance, there will be new technology elements that will be foundational for future steps. We've been doing that. We have some examples. As society, what we do about PICs, with the evolution of governance, with tests and implementation and continuous implementation. So first we had PICs, then we had PICs that can be paid in installments, and so different evolutions over time. So we should see regulation as a living entity, something that involves dialogue, that involves participative governance. That seems to be the right way to go, in my opinion. In conclusion, this is why I believe forums like this are so important. This is a space for governance. It's not just about talking about technology. This is a forum where we can talk about the trends we have for the future, developments made so far, potential pathways forwards, and what are the weaknesses and strengths about our current needs and our future developments, which is exactly what we're discussing here. So I've run out of time, but I would like to say that this is what this debate is about. We have a lot of common points, but we have a technological, social, and legal challenge of building security in a context of uncertainties and also establishing trust through dialogue, also creating learnings and also development that is made legitimate by the society. And verifiable credentials are a crucial point within the digital ecosystem and will be even more so as we build it even more towards a unified version. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone who are at this venue and those who are remotely. A special thanks to the World Bank, to Nick.br, and I also like to congratulate MGI for supporting such an important initiative. MGI is the home of ITI. ITI is an autarky which is related to MGI directly. And as Guilherme has said, we have been gathering experience in the past 25 years regarding a core topic which identifies ITI as part of the society, where we had gathered experience in trust. Trust is a key word for ITI and the starting point of today's discussion. As a country, we have a single opportunity. Similarly, we have gathered knowledge about safe infrastructures throughout those 25 years of ITI and public keys and the infrastructure of public keys in Brazil. We are living a different moment than the one we had experienced in the past. Before, we were on a journey that was in the vanguard of this journey, ITI had designed a model with infrastructure with little world references. But today we have models to be assessed and to be criticized. And there I see an opportunity, which is to understand based on those models and case studies the issues that will meet our needs and which will not. As our dear friend from India had mentioned, as well as Claudio, this regulatory room may be as complex as we would imagine. And here I think there is a trap. We have to be careful with the first steps and with the next steps that we are going to give towards this governance model. Technically speaking, I'm not worried at all. We have accrued knowledge which we gathered in the past years to work with open standards and international standards, which will allow us to perform interoperability and to have a trans-frontier acknowledgement of credentials and signatures. We already do that with the Mercosur. We have a list of trust which is anchored at ITI, where all countries from the Mercosur may check, verify, and validate signatures and illegal actions. We are advancing towards the European Union, Brussels, where we are going to set a trust interoperability of documents between countries. We have a quite good technical knowledge of open standards, security and safe environments, cryptography. We verify signatures from Uruguay, and Uruguay verifies signatures from Brazil throughout the trust list. So we might have enough critical mass knowledge to give an assertive step towards the modeling of a national system for verifiable credentials. And our main challenge is exactly to build up a system of verifiable credentials and to understand who are the actors that will be part of this ecosystem. And how should governance be ready to go? Well, governance is also going through a learning process. Governance learns from regulated process, and from those process, we grab information to update our information. That's why I believe that a regulatory sandbox is key, because it will improve the learning curve and will emphasize a constant search for more learning. And we cannot promote laissez-faire if no one will build up their technological environment. We are going to end up with a Babel Tower. We will have a model which will not sustain the civil society. And we have players from the civil society where citizens should be in the center of this mosaic of agents. How to make them aware and enhance literacy to understand the importance of privacy of their information, and how to guarantee such a privacy within a wallet is different if you empower citizens to authorize or not the use of a private information which belongs to that citizen. And that's very challenging. Literacy may run in a different scale than the time of uploading an infrastructure, which is also different from a time that agent A or B will be in compliance with such a framework. So that's more or less like a difference between private sector, governmental, and the idea who will credit who to do what is quite complex, believe me. And we had our certificates at ICP, which are fully regulated under the reasoning of a public keys. But they were not fully implemented and they are not being used as they should. And there are some other aspects behind the scene that should also be considered. Authorities and agencies, they are self-accredited. And anytime we talk about verifiable credentials, we understand that the government is raised with a trust source and a governance model which talks about education, health, fairness, or any other topics which will testify your declarations that you have an order to do this or that in terms of taxes. There are enough components which are clear enough to turn that legal. We have enough structure to turn that into legal framework and to add compliance to technological standards. If that would be achieved, would somehow break down inertia. On the other hand, the market has is already established trust aspects. I cannot tell bank A or B that they should or should not believe on a credit service which is supplied by company A or company B. They already trust that for quite a while. It's not up to me, neither to the state, to say, hello, Bank A, you can trust this and you cannot trust that thing. No. Challenges then are trying understanding what should be regulated effectively and what, according to the European model, which is a very complex model, the American model, it's a fully deregulated model and there are many others, but we end up learning from those other nations and make our fine tuning to start on a verifiable credential systems that will be optimized to Brazil, and it's up to us to give that step ahead. And in my humble opinion, we are very close to produce and to suggest standards, models of trust lists, to start thinking about citizens wallets, and there are already products which are already demanding that, such as the digital statute for children and adolescents, ECA Digital. If we should start just with a credential or a signature of a trust source, these are aspects yet to be solved in the coming months. But the good news is we have opportunities and they are present. Brazilian authorities, they have been exercising all these issues and they are carefully listening to all stakeholders, and the likelihood to give a step towards great opportunities is quite high. We are very close to a maturity system in Brazil with experiences that nevertheless will be taken by other nations and other sites. I guess we are really well positioned into that discussion. Maybe we started different from others such as the ICP, and now as we are in the forefront, sort of speaking, we might be able to find the best pathway to Brazil to follow, and what sort of balance we should reach to allow such an improvement in that sense. Thank you. Thank you so much to all panelists. We still have a few minutes left for questions or comments. Let's address two questions. Go ahead, please. No, we cannot hear. I'm sorry. The microphone, it's really bad. We cannot hear. I apologize. Yeah, unfortunately, the mic is not audible. I apologize. I believe that many people they were not quite getting into the topic. I don't want to answer. Anyone can do as you feel like without clarity, if you know what I mean. And my question to you is, are you positive about the idea of a clear division? I mean, at what extent the public sector can go on, and what would be a role from the private sector? And to illustrate my question, I will give you an example which is not exactly related to verifiable credentials, the digital signature. Before all this digital world, we used to have a system where the government would not interfere and would have the counting offices for signatures authentications. And sometimes they were allies because they demand a number of documents to some services that would be authenticated by the private sector. And today, with the gov.br, I already have that digital signature which has advanced to what is part of what those notary offices do. And the government seems to be getting into some sectors which used to be from the private sector. And now I want to hear from you. How do you see the role? Are they clearly defined, or anyone can do anything and there is no division between what can be done and what cannot, and by who? Do we have another question from the audience, or maybe remotely, those who are in the YouTube? Yes, another question here. Hello, everyone. I am a director of Data Privacy Brazil. I have a question which goes more towards geopolitics and infrastructure. We see a relationship between the IPD agenda and verifiable credentials. In the past months, we had a number of attacks from the USTR, from President Trump against our PICs and against our digital public infrastructure. Do you see any geopolitical risk to use that as a reason to defeat digital public policies as being an unfair policy against Google, Apple, or any other big techs which are aligned to the Trump government? Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Before I hand over to the panelists, let me just make a comment. Notary offices, are they really private or are they regulated by the judiciary power? And one does not replace the other. The public does not replace the private and vice versa. I'll try to answer to your questions from a future perspective and put in the head of a organizers and not it's important to say that verifiable credentials are those to be signed, and they have to be organized under a pillar of we issuer and a validator and a receptor. As a validator, that sounds okay. The person to receive it will be the one to validate the document, and the private sector participation as someone who is concerned about the information integrity, that is clear, and the state role is maybe to support technology development throughout manuals, guidance, or supply codes, instruction manuals, but that is part of a business ecosystem. From a wallet, though, we have a role, which is defining what the policies are, what is the data integrity, and that will change according to the issue. We have part of regulatory aspects, credential issues, and at what extent a private wallet, what sort of requirements are necessary for a private wallet and for verifiable credentials issued by a public agency with or without information that may depend on the type of signature, the type of model, the type of sector. Probably there we still have a lack, and the sandbox will show that sector by sector, a personal information may be more sensitive than a school certificate, or maybe an invoice is less sensitive than health information. The policies as how we are going to make use of that information may end up be the reason for how and yes or no the wallet market should be regulated. As to the issuance, we have to split that between private and public. The association of manufacturer of a certain product may issue credentials to their members and then be being managed by a verifiable credentials, working just with a verifiable credential that is going to work with that system, being that a JSON system or any other. That is a functional signed JSON, and it will work under a JSON encryption. Anytime we talk about a public documentation, we are going to bump into sectorial validation. Who will issue verify the credentials of someone who concluded the school, elementary school or high school? Who will do that? The Secretary of Education or the school itself? I quite like the concept of national data infrastructure, which has already been passed at a federal level. And we would love to turn that nationally, where we would consider not just people, citizens, but also norms, policies, frameworks, data models, tech tools, and data assets related to public data and different data nature, such as different policies as well as different ways of interoperability that will apply these tech tools, all of that framed on architecture and who can supply what to whom for what situation, where that is private or not. That is an architecture discussion and an issue to go deep on. And it's still about geopolitical, I understand, and I don't think that can be seen as an unfair practices, but just a way to anticipate and take into account the societal demands and all the sectorial criteria on the way. And I believe and I hope that will not be a geopolitical discussion.
Okay, now related to what Guilherme said, and trying to answer Wagner's and Raphael's questions. I like this discussion. I think this is exactly what we should do. We should ask bold questions and be careful in our answers. That's part of what we should do. Answering Wagner's question, it is indeed very complex. This is why we talk about using sandboxes to determine the players. Although I disagree with you, I believe that the government is reacting to a society's demand. The digital certification model is very powerful and has solved a lot of problems. I'm not criticizing that. I'm just making a statement. We are working with certifier agencies because this model has not fully been taken to society. So the advanced signature system is being used in large scale by those who cannot afford a digital certificate. That is kind of indicating us a way to work with the private sector. So if I trust you and you have good technical level, I do not need you to believe in that. I can use your credential as long as I can trust that you are who you're saying you are. That makes it easier in B2B relationships and also in business relationships. But in other cases, we need the state. So a promissory note worth 10 million reais. Who can make sure that this is true? Of course, we need to count on the state, on the government to do that. So there is space for everyone. Everyone will play a role. So in the private market, you will take some products to citizens that will make sense to them, while the state plays a different role, which is ensuring access to public services that will be affordable and easy to use. So I'm not that concerned because notary offices themselves operate within a trust-based structure, and they use some state tools for that, such as qualified signatures. I do not want to take too long in my answer, and I would like to respond to Rafael's provocation related to the geopolitical issue. Well, we've been discussing technology for quite some time, and we see some unexpected events to be very subtle in my comment. So, welcome to the geopolitics world. I have no questions that technology is at the center of it. The instruments that are being used are at the core of this discussion. So, I would like to take this discussion beyond. As President Lula has said, it is about sovereignty. How does sovereignty relate to geopolitics? What is the role of technology there? So, any model we will use, we should not deeply depend on technology structures from abroad. And at the same time, we need to realize that those players are here, they're part of the game, and we need to determine what is their role in this game. So, any sovereign state who needs, of course, to any player in this game needs to follow the rules. So it's different when you play on a weekend just at a friend's house versus playing at the World Cup. Rules are different. So all states are trying to strike a balance between their role in participating in this game and also abiding by the current rules. So also we have privacy. We have different models and frameworks for data privacy in other states. If you want to play this game, well, you need to play by our rules. This is part of any society. But the good thing about this is that in this environment, we're also able to present our nationally developed technology. ICP security system is based on technology developed 100% in Brazil, hardware and software. And we have people here in this room who contributed for those developments. So those technologies were developed by companies, Brazilian companies that became multinational companies producing security software and data protection software. And we have also other things that were prepared, technologies prepared for a quantic event. And this is industry induced by a system produced by a public key infrastructure. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Nilson, Guilherme. Well, we are running late. I would like to ask you a little bit of tolerance so that we have at least 2 minutes for our colleagues final remarks. So could you make your closing remarks and share with us, Anand?
Seria interessante se você pudesse refletir pouco também sobre
Or
sua
maybe
experiência de
could you
implementar,
tell us about your
apoiar a
experience
implementação da
in
solução
supporting
Verifiable
the implementation of verifiable credentials implementation in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, and to compare the relationship between the federal government and the state level governments in Brazil,
Se for possível,
if you may,
se você quiser dizer suas palavras finais,
maybe together with your final remarks, and then I will give the floor to the others. Thank you.
It's very unique what we are doing in Brazil, right? So on the rural credit, where a farmer could get his verifiable credentials from CAR, CR, CF, all of these agencies which either hold land records for the farmer or their tax returns or their family registrations or the land registrations and all of this data. They could use all of this data as verifiable credentials. They've been using a mobile app called MIU mobile app, which is given by the federal government for the rural farmers. They were able to get all the credentials, go to the banks, apply for the rural credit loans to get either credit for their crops or the or for any farming equipment. In Feb this year, I think there is a female farmer by name, if I'm not wrong, Andrea. Right? If I'm wrong, I get that name corrected. But that lady has got a rural credit loan for buying a tractor for her farm. Right, so she could get all of that using digital verifiable credentials that has been accepted, issued by these organizations, and they're accepted by the bank. Right, Banco do Brazil has actually shared that loan. So this is a pilot that we have done so far, and we are involved in getting that verifiable credentials as a digital public infrastructure within Brazil. The data is in Brazil that has been done by DataPro here. It is a sovereign, nobody else this get data out of it. And we are very eager to see how this pans out to the larger families and other states within Brazil, right? So to get the same kind of things, I have already know that there are more banks which are coming into the ecosystem trying to get this coverage done across multiple banks, across multiple regions. So this is something that we are very closely looking at to see how this could be replicated across different other nations, right? So this is very exciting, right? So this is one of the good use cases of verifiable credentials, right? This is in rural credit agriculture. Farmers are getting benefited. This could go into multiple other places as well, right? There are multiple use cases that Guy and other people keep talking about. And we are trying to see what are the lessons that we can learn, what are the best practices that we can get out of Brazil and take it to the rest of the world, including India. Thank you.
Bom, para tentar avançar e concluir, acho que
Okay, in
uma boa
conclusion, I would like to
entender
leave some food for
que a
thought.
governança credencial verificável ela
The
acaba
verifiable
sendo uma ótima
governance
infraestrutura pública digital.
is also part of the
Entender
digital
a
public
operação
infrastructure,
válida,
DPI. So understanding its role, understanding how it interoperates, and what are the components that can build this system is crucial. That has been instrumental in even in our internal processes. So, for example, because of a legal decision of combining land information in Brazil, we are basing ourselves on DPI to achieve that. When we understand public records, playing a public role, a public service is very helpful. One of the challenges we have as society is turning the ecosystem of land records as part of a DPI rationale, because it's already a public data structure. So it's the NND rationale. If we can organize the rules, architecture, data models, technologies, and information assets, then we will be able to have verifiable credentials so that a holder can have secure information end-to-end and can exchange information that is part of public records. We still have a way to go in that area. So maybe a sectorial regulation is necessary, and in the future, a cross-sectional regulation. To wrap up, I would just like to reinforce the fact that we are being very careful, very diligent in these discussions involving all players. This is the beginning of a journey with very good potential, with many opportunities ahead of us. We have learned so many lessons over the years. So the state will be part of this discussion, but it will also be ready to balance this discussion involving the private sector, which already provides trust-based services, B2B, and in other environments. So we want to take concrete steps, design steps to build a national verifiable credential systems that is interoperable, standardized, and that will allow citizens to have control over their information. But at the same time, that will also allow market to do business without barriers. I would like to thank once again for this invitation. I'd like to thank the audience for attending us and for attending this meeting here on site or remotely. Thank you. I would like to thank the participants for their contribution and on behalf of Claudio Machado, the mediator, and I ask them to please pose for the picture now. Once again, thank you for your participation. We will have a brief break and we'll resume in 15 minutes. In continuation, we're not going to have a panel called Age Verification, Complex Challenges. So we will discuss the aspects involved in the implementation of age verification mechanisms. The moderator of this panel will be Beatriz Rocha from cweb.br, from nic.br, and web project analyst at cweb.br, nic.br. She works in applied research on human-computer interaction, web, and artificial intelligence, focused on social impacts of digital technologies. And then we're going to have Enia Costa, researcher and project leader at the Center for Teaching and Research in Innovation at FGV São Paulo Law School. She develops studies on artificial intelligence governance, human rights, and legal innovation. We'd also like to invite Miriam Wimmer, Director of the National Data Protection Agency. She has extensive experience in the development of public policies in the areas of data protection, communications, and digital law, in addition to academic work on the subject. Also, we'll have Rafael Zanata, co-director of Data Privacy Brazil, and a postdoctoral researcher at University of São Paulo. He is one of the main Brazilian references in data protection, digital rights, and platform regulation. We'll also be joined by Victor Fernandes, National Secretary of Digital Rights of the Ministry of Justice and Public Security. He's a specialist in regulation and competition, and he has developed his career at Anatel, CADE, also the presidency of Brazil and the Federal Supreme Court. Beatriz Rocha will be our moderator. Good morning. It is an honor to be here to discuss this topic. We are going to talk about age verification in the context of verifiable credentials. It's an honor to have these panelists with me today. This is a very important topic to us, especially at NIC BR, CWeb BR, and CGI.br. So there are several initiatives conducted at NIC-BR about this, such as the recommendations of age verification made by the CGI.br group, and also workshops in the seminar about teenagers and children that NIC-BR has been organizing for quite some time, including also another document launched by CITIC and CGI, which is age verification practices in 25 digital services in Brazil. This is a very interesting document, particularly important for the discussions of this panel. We are the Brazilian chapter of W3C, so we've been following up W3C initiatives on verifiable credentials, age verification, and incentive to the use of standards. The verifiable credentials standards also recommended by W3C. Verifiable credentials are a promising alternative to prove the attributes that are required for the digital ECA statute. We have expert panels who are going to discuss this topic with us. First, I would like to turn over to Miriam. Thank you, Miriam, for being here. Good morning. Good morning, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to participate in this meeting. It's an honor. I am not an expert in verifiable credentials. I would like to learn from other panelists about this. And I would like to share some information about what we have been doing at NDP, the National Data Protection Agency, especially in the topics closely related to verifiable credentials. So I represent NDP, and it is a national data protection agency that you're so familiar with. It was created in 2020 to protect personal data, and in September 2025, once the digital ECA statute was approved, we are also responsible for implementing this new law to protect children and adolescents. The Digital ECA Act comes with different measures that want to provide an effective implementation of this law. As September last year, we had the ECA law approval and had 6 months to put that as effective law. And we also had a provisional measure that was approved, and they turned us into a regulator. Also, we were assigned as an autonomous authority to protect the rights of children and adolescents. So this is a whole package of decisions that not just created by decree, the national policy of the protection for children and adolescents in digital rights, but also regulated the ECA law. So let me start by highlighting the importance of age verification online. This is a crucial element to make sure that this new law is effective. We realized, and also documented by the TIC Kids Online survey conducted by CITIC and it.br, saying that 92% of young people with ages from 9 to 17 years of age use the internet, especially through the smartphone, and they also use a lot of Gen AI technologies. I am the mother of a 12-year-old, and I can see that they use internet a lot. They use ICTs a lot, and it's very accessible in our generation. It was not. Porn, for example, porn content when I was a child was sold and wrapped in a black plastic, and you could not see a video. You have only access to adults. But today, porn content is much easier to access. So the idea of the ECA law is the result of a long reflection, not just after influencers such as Felka denounced. The level of protection that makes sure that children and adolescents can be protected online is very important, and age verification mechanisms are crucial to that end. We want to make sure that children and adolescents can have a safe experience digitally, respecting their development and also their psychological level of how mature they are. So our topic today is about complex challenges, and this is one example, because the digital ECA law is not just about age verification. It assumes that all players of the digital ecosystems have obligations. So since its inception, it needs to adopt reasonable measures to prevent and mitigate access to exposure of inappropriate contents. And that deploys into several obligations related to preventing access to inadequate content, parental supervision, especially in contents that are not forbidden but might be inappropriate. Also, requiring that accounts of children under 16 should be tagged to the accounts of their parents online. Also, forbidding young people to have access to certain electronic games or content that is monetized or eroticized content. And there's also innovations like new rules about removal of content. That was a recent decision of the Supreme Court. Also, we talked about the concern with excessive use of digital media. So we are talking about a complex legal framework that will require a lot from the regulators and also from the corporations to adapt. One key player is NPD, but we are not the only player. It's a complex institutional arrangement because in addition to ANPD, we also have the role of the judiciary power, also courts for the youth, and there are several responsibilities that clearly are on corporations that also need to establish those mechanisms properly.
Let me mention a little bit about what ANPD is doing about that and raise some aspects requiring regarding data verification and age verification and age assurance. ANPD is a regulatory agency. I have to correct myself because we cannot call ANPD as an agency. And ANPD to become an agency, that is not just a tech change, but also it takes into account a number of practical manifestations. An authority would be a concept that we would not quite understand, was sui generis. Why should we call them as an entity which is in charge of fundamental rights, and with the ANPD as a guarantor of the rights, now ANPD is finally an agency. And for those past 5 years, no one would understand the meaning of authority, neither of the ministries or the judiciary power. And now that ANPD became an agency, we are entitled of a number of guarantees that will ensure our independence in terms of budget, economic aspects, and that represents a gain to our own public wallet services. And as a regulatory agency and Anatel, that is key for a constitutional regulatory agency where we are going to strengthen that agency that will become stronger and also to be a way to understand the different jurisprudences and where we are going to have a professional team of public services. Those new attributes, they require a regulatory agency to expand our priorities and our research scope for research, including civil society, social participation, and other stakeholders to whom we are not used to include in the past. ANPD, in the same week that has been passed, ANPD has disclosed an agenda of actions about the ECA Digital and schedule for age verification and data assurance and verification. We had disclosed a preliminary agenda, and we also reached the decision where we would initially focus on players which are central in our ecosystem, such as the app stores and operational systems. At ECA Digital, all these players, they are obliged to do age verification and to issue a sign that will be received by other players by API as their age range and someone who is searching for a certain app. And emphasizing those players would represent a systemic gain because that will have a spin-off within the digital wallet. Similarly, we are developing documents for consultation. Right now, we are undergoing an open consultation for age verification, and the deadline will be July 9. We have just concluded some subsides that are part of that digital statute for children and adolescents, and some other administrative aspects that will allow us to apply at ECA Digital some taxes and other measures or fees that may be applied by the ANPD or the legal power. And to close and conclude, let me say that by age verification or age assurance, I understand that the terminology at ECA Digital may be complex and not just defines different approaches such as app stores with their own liability, content producers, they have a different one, prohibited products, it has to do with a different liability, which is more a social responsibility than just age verification. If we are talking about marketplace, the pornography, social media, some gambles, and other electronic games, all of that has to be regulated by ANPD resolutions or by some guidance and manuals that will help our society. And ANPD, together with the society, establish some minimum requirements for age verification, such as proportionality, privacy, accuracy, inclusion and non-discrimination, transparency in auditing personal data, and interoperability. These are key elements anytime we are talking about a reliable and robust system of age verification, which go along some other fundamental rights. We understand that we should have a reasonable level of certainty about the age of those users and also to avoid excessive collection of personal data for a mass surveillance or traceability, which would not be feasible in accordance to our constitutional framework. And now I thank you for your time and I give the floor back to Beatrice. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. You have emphasized the importance of a panel like that to be able to discuss all these key elements which are key for protection of our children and adolescents. I hand over to Victor Fernandez. Thank you. Thank you all. I wish you a very profitable day and good morning. And of course, I couldn't thank Nick enough for the invitation and for all the kindness to be part of a panel with people who I admire so much and who I have been following the trajectory for a long time. Age verification as a topic, and I'm not an expert on verifiable credentials. We are still on a learning curve and we keep learning from experts and also all the representatives from DataPrev where this event is taking place. I would like to highlight the importance of age verification and how that is so important in ECA Digital and that goes beyond its regular role. I would even dare saying that age verification would no longer become a mandatory requirement for access control to prohibited content and then become a portal for users' experiences. And what do I mean by that? Well, a traditional perception of the decree or law is that age verification is a mandatory requirement for service producers that will exhibit prohibited content according to different articles and decrees. If I am conveying prohibited content, I have to comply with all these laws and decrees. And according to the decree 12,280, 12,880 and Article 24, where 11 requirements, they become a solution for age verification as a mandatory driver to assess and allow prohibited content. And from the Digital Rights Secretary, which is conducting a larger debate, not just with the Data National Protection, but all ANPD and others, it seems that age verification solutions, they will also work for other means in addition to Article 9 of ECA Digital, ECA Digital. First of all, age verification is very important in reflecting the work of digital rights secretaries been doing for age classification, indication of age identification and verifications. Since that law has been passed last March, our age indication is performing a review of games and apps considering the approval of ECA Digital. All those apps which would show any sort of prohibited content, the age indication has been altered to 18 years of age. Marketplaces that would offer the purchase of beverages or cigarettes or any other product which are prohibited according to the decree. As to electronic games, with a multi-box inside, we understood that we should change the age recommendation for 18 years as well. And that has changed a lot our game industry. What we have been constantly discussing with the secretary is to implement age verification within that environment if there is a closer contact to that product which is prohibited. The Article 21 of the decree says if there is a bid box, you can give a date verification at the time of the game, and that will change the age indication within that app or that game. There will be an age verification portal, and such a verification will be related to a specific prohibited content. And how can we classify all that environment of that game application if there is one content which is not allowed, but not necessarily the whole environment of that game? Some game sector representatives, they are even mentioning about age verification to split experiences within a certain game environment where they're going to differentiate different games within a classification of different games based on age classifications under 18, game experiences that may be adapted by 9 years of age, 17, 18, and then set age verification, not to test majority, but to test the level of use of the users about that certain feature or functionality. There is something else. At what extent age verification may work as a safeguard of regulatory compliance in addition to prohibited content. There is a decree according different articles, a number of manipulative designs such as autoplay, infinite rollout, a number of addicted designs that can be harmful, and safety by default. We could also mention a service provider or an app provider to be entitled to verify age. And if I'm sure that I'm dealing with an adult, I don't have to worry about those tools by default. I could use age verification to guarantee that just adults are using that service. And even though that is a service that can be probably accessed by children and adolescents, with age verification solution, I'm going to be sure that that user is an adult and not a child, neither an adolescent. So therefore, I wouldn't need to worry about any other regulatory safeguards such as security by default. With that, we have an overview as how age verification will be important, not just to be a dialogue or a safeguard of access to prohibited content. Maybe age verification will be a compliance, a broader compliance tool to suit better users' experiences at different areas. And our Brazilian model has a number of regulatory challenges. And the first one would be efforts that ANPD is doing to specify which are the necessary requirements for having age verification with accuracy and effectiveness. we have already 11 requirements according to Article 14, and ANPD has released the preliminary solutions for age verifications, and we are designing a guide by ANPD. So we are on our way. Now we have to survive with that two layers model. One of the jurisdictions has adopted age verification just at some operating systems and app stores, such as California did. But Brazil, on the other hand, had adopted two layers verifications at the app stores and also to producers and suppliers that will verify that on a second layer. And how can we relate those two layers? Well, that requires a number of regulatory efforts. How can we guarantee robustness of the agent sign signal which is sent by the App Store or by the services to vendors and to apps? That is still a challenge to be faced. And let's not forget that the decree has it's everyone's responsibility. We cannot just, not comply with age verifications and blame the other layer and not your own layer. And one final regulatory challenge is to really understand what are the possibilities to develop in Brazil some sort of co-regulatory model which will allow that both ANPD could become an entity to be an accreditor of solutions that will become possible to other certified entities that could also exercise efforts in terms to certify those services. And our statute for children and adolescents, they believe that the power public could be the one to develop public solutions for age verification, which is a topic that has been broadly discussed by the federal government. These are the main regulatory challenges that the Justice Ministry and the Justice Secretary for Digital Rights are discussing. And initiatives like those conducted by CGI, releasing the study of mapping 25 services, and where age verifications for those 25 services are already on the way, and that will help us a lot to map our future challenges. Thank you. Thank you, Victor. That was very clear, and also the challenge that we have about age verification. It was very helpful, not just to me, but to our public. Now, Enya, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank also for the invitation to be part of such a distinguished panel. So a panel of experts on this topic. And I believe that this is also going to complement the panel discussions that preceded us, the more technical ones of yesterday, and also the previous panel that talked about governance. I would also like to thank Nick.br, so Web, CGI, for the invitation. So let me start by introducing myself. I am a project leader and researcher at the Teaching Research Center associated to the law school Fundação Getúlio Vargas in São Paulo. For the past 10 years, we've been developing research studies that interact with law, technology, and society. Also, the future of technologies and the future of legal professionals, and more specifically, the impact on technology on our digital practice, and also teaching and innovation, considering how we can train our students, justice operators, and so on regarding recent technological changes. So we've been developing since the beginning of the year a project to monitor the national implementation of the digital ECA law so that we can provide quality and technical rigor, because the implementation of digital ECA is indeed a challenge. We need to think of a well-qualified teaching system, legal aspects. And we also, as part of our research, we plan to have a database of use cases, of use studies, so that we can provide a national training course for professionals in the right insurance environment. So we have disciplines in undergraduate and graduate level, also workshops with various professionals, including some workshops supported by NIC.br. Well, since yesterday, we've talked about semantics. So when we talk about age verification or verifiable credentials, it was clear to see in previous discussions that there are different ways of naming this as part of digital ECA, not just after the approval of this law, but also of the other legal measures that have been approved. We try to translate to the audience, to the general public, what are these differences? So, what is age verification as an umbrella term that includes inference verification, and within each one of those layers, specific techniques, including verifiable credentials. So, I am not going to talk about these details, but when we talk to a group that works both with technical and legal issues, these semantic differences and nuances are very relevant. So previous speakers talked about these requirements, the general requirements, and I would like to talk about the general requirements related to age verification as established by the decree 12880. There are 11 general requirements that are grouped in 6 key elements. So proportionality, the requirement of having mechanisms that are accurate, robust, and reliable. Also, data protection and privacy, interoperability, which was mentioned here very much, and transparency, auditability, and inclusion and non-discrimination. I would like to talk more about this final element, thinking about some of the challenges we see for the implementation of the technical and also standard framework involved in the digital ECA. So age verification mechanisms should consider diversity. This was a point also raised in other panels, considering socioeconomic context in Brazil, different levels of access to digital technologies in Brazil. Also, to think about development of technologies that will contribute to reduce structural inequalities that will impact children and adolescents. We'd also like to have to adopt measures to prevent and mitigate discriminatory biases, to avoid undue or abusive discrimination. Now, talking specifically about those challenges, we run the risk of going into some of these problems. Yesterday, we talked about strategies and solutions, but now I would like to raise some of these problems that we face, some reflections for the development of those solutions. So we face the risk of digital exclusion. If we develop tools that will ultimately depend on modern technology and modern devices, this can be a barrier to access. There are also connectivity barriers. CETIC and NIC.br show studies on problems with access and different levels of access depending on the different social strata in Brazil. This should be considered in building this architecture. There's also risk of algorithmic discrimination or algorithmic bias. So we have You are talking about data of children and adolescents. And those differences can be even bigger if you consider racial groups that have not been considered in the creation of the databases. So if we're using biometry or image verification mechanisms for age verification purposes, then we need to be careful. We also need to think about accessibility for people with disabilities, such as the technical standards mentioned yesterday, and their interest in developing these technologies. Some international standards talk about some criteria for people with disability and people with specific needs. If we think about a nationwide infrastructure and to develop verifiable credentials by the government, for example, in Brazil, we need to consider these various forms of representation. And in this scenario, even so complex, there is yet another point of concern, which is shared devices. We talked a lot yesterday and today about how we can issue these verifiable credentials, sometimes connected to devices as a way of protection. But in Brazil, there are devices that are shared by children under the age of 12, adolescents, and also caretakers, parents, or another caretaker. So, how would that impact on the experience of those users? And how are we designing those systems to take into account these nuances? Again, resorting to TIC Kids Online survey, 92% of Brazilians with ages from 9 to 17 use the internet in 2025. That represents 24 million children and adolescents. Recently, when laws were approved to protect youth in school environments, we realized that there was a drop in the ownership of smartphones, on their own smartphones, especially within younger children, 9 to 10 and 11 to 12 years of age. This means that those children and adolescents are using the internet, using mostly smartphones or cell phones, but using technologies they are not of their own cell phones. They're using someone else's cell phones. There is another study that analyzes children aged from 0 to 8, also showing a difference in terms of their ownership of the devices. And of course, there is a difference there, especially considered socioeconomic brackets analyzed. So, what are the risks? If we think about tools that will promote protection of those children, we might have some friction in that user experience. So there will be several layers of verification, of age verification, to ensure that that content is being accessed by somebody who actually has the proper age for such access. But if there is too much friction, if the technology design does not take into account this experience, that can also lead to the circumvention of control mechanisms, some sort of bypass. So these technologies are important, but we need to understand that in practice, it could be easier to bypass those age verification systems, especially for parents who are so busy that they might just bypass that and give the cell phone in the hands of the children. So Internet Matters made a study in the UK, and considering the prohibition in UK or the age verification requirement to access some contents, by interviewing children, adolescents, and their parents about this experience, it was concluded that 32% of children said that they had already bypassed age verification systems. And when asked to parents, 70% said that they actively help their children to bypass that age verification or allowed or ignore that practice in 9% of cases. So Enilson had mentioned that in the previous panel, that we need to have more literacy, more information to parents. So it goes beyond the legal obligations that is already included in digital ECHA law. So it's also have information on risks and also security measures provided to users by platforms. And also it's important to increase the literacy of parents of children and adolescents on those aspects. So what does it mean to issue a verifiable credential? And how does that impact on the use? And finally, I'd like to reinforce the recommendation of to read this study conducted by CETIC that analyzed the use in different age groups and for different services in Brazil. And that study indicated some difficulty in accessibility and understanding of all those services and how they could protect children and adolescents in age verification. I would like to conclude by leaving some final messages. The effectiveness of the age verification mechanisms will depend both on the technical design that we've been discussing today and yesterday, but also depend on the social context in which they'll be implemented. Access inequalities, connectivity, accessibility inequalities should be considered, as well as digital literacy. And of course, we should not forget about privacy, inclusion, and non-discrimination, because this audience is of absolute importance. Thank you very much for your attention. And this is my contact information for future discussions. Thank you. Thank you for describing all these initiatives. Yeah, digital ECHA affects people who need to understand about the contents of these law. So the initiatives you shared about digital literacy were so important. Once again, we talked about the document provided by CGI and CETIC. This document, as stated in your slide, this document also brings some clarification on technology about age verification. And there are other CGI documents that you might be interested in reading. If you want, you can contact me about those documents and other initiatives. Okay, now I will turn over to Rafael. Thank you, Enrique, Claudio, and Wagner for this invitation. I'm Rafael Sanata, co-director of Data Privacy Brazil. We are a research and awareness institute. We are part of, we've been working for 8 years. We want to build together a fair informational system. We started working with the digital ECHA since the beginning. We engaged very strongly with the NPD in this agenda. We also represent a civil society in private information. This was a particularly important topic today. Digital ECHA is the core of the ANPD. We interacted very much with the legislative power, the legislative brand, and we could even convince the head of the legislative branch, and we have digital ECHA approved. There was a lot of pressure from society, and this is a very busy year. There was Carnival, there's a World Cup, and the digital ECHA. So we had talking about that in different areas, in different groups. I also talked about justice system and digital ECHA, and now we are having some ANPD consultations that fortunately are giving us a lot of work because there are several public consultation processes going on. including the age verification guide that is expected to take place in July 9. And I believe that the international community is going to join us in this discussion because somebody in my team is making a presentation, the Global Network Initiative, about the age verification system for the digital echo. It is good to be the last person to say because panelists who preceded me already covered part of that. But here are some fundamental assumptions. It's important to understand the rights of children and adolescents. So the Convention of 89, the Act of 1990. Brazil is a profoundly unequal country. We don't have just one single group of children and adolescents, and they have rights. So they're not just the ones who have the result of our decisions, but it's a challenge to also include children and adolescents in those discussions of age verification. And there's also the probable access concept. So in the application of digital ECHA, there are three challenges that we'll talk about. One is the concentration of age verification markets with a deviation of purpose. The challenge in terms of damage of biometric data leakage that could lead to damage in the identification of people, and data mining damage by private agents of verifiable credentials, which relates to W3C in a recent technical note that they published. So our assumption is that we have different gradients of privacy. Privacy is not just one single definition. A good framework is this image made by W3C. These are about choices that will have a specific consequences for using your privacy right. So the privacy philosophy, the Helen Nissenbell's philosophy is used where it just makes sense talking about violation of privacy within a specific context of issuers and those who receive information in which privacy is built. So right now, the discussions we had of 3 years ago, as this is an image, when the international community still made some confusions about age verification, facial characterization, but right now I think those concepts are very clear. Also, the decree 12880 clearly differentiates between age verification, signs of age. So that decree reflects the maturity we have reached by putting age verification or age check as an umbrella concept. I think that this panel should be called age check, not age verification, because age verification is specifically about something. When you're talking about highly reliable age attributes related to content that should not be accessed by those children or that group. So yes, that's a very important point.
And we are here talking about different things. Age assurance is different than age verification. So let's make that clear. There is a technical expertise again for implications of age assurance on privacy and data protection, such as the European Commission. The Spanish agency is doing a great job with the threat models for age verification and age assurance. They are concerned about the potential risks. They are computational models and they are addressing what may go wrong. And ANPD is open for that consultation because they want to understand what sort of risks can be foreseen. So ANPD will not end up formalizing a model which sounds like well intentional, but which may end up causing harm. And ANPD during that consultation was to summarize the 11 attributes within a more compact model. And this is the driving engine based on risks and proportionality. But still, we have to keep on discussing about risks. And I want to be controversial and ask you and motivate you to talk more about risks and possible problems and harms. We cannot, we have to take into account children's interests. And by talking about implementation of ECA Digital, a risk model according to the ANPD should be understood in order to benefit children's interests. So design choices about scalability, if you are going to go from an age signal to an age verification or yet age assurance based on official documents, you have to take into account if that is okay for progressive autonomy to that age range, or if you are not developing an unnecessary risk to those children and adolescents. And a first risk to approach is, in the Australian report, Age Assurance Trial, they state that as being a market concentration risk. ECA Digital will create age assurance and verifications. And we see a number of players, Persona, IOTS, and others who are in the forefront of those markets. As we delay on building up verifiable credentials, some companies will end up promoting gambling internet apps where they are going to adopt in a hurry age verification drivers based on facial recognition, biometric information to acquire that market as fast as possible and end up being a winner takes it all model. Therefore, we have to pay attention to other risks, which is a pressure by regulatory precaution. And everyone will end up migrating to those rather more severe mechanisms. And ANPD says the following: no, the principle is to minimize the data, is to adopt a risk-based model. And we see companies which are in charge of that market about the detour of geopolitical is the geopolitical discussion about a detour of means for intelligence services, which became a problem with Discord that discontinued the agreement with that company. A second risk, biometric data as an input that may lead to subsequent harm, especially when we talk about age verification or any other mechanisms that will collect personal data information. If you don't have an agile exclusion driver to exclude that information, and that is a principle, and it's available on the W3C documents, ANPD, and others. But still, we might have companies doing things wrongly, not adopting a privacy by design principle, and also producing storage of documents. If there is any safety incident where there is a leakage of a video or a photo of a child or adolescent, it's very easy to end up producing pornography via a synthetic video or throughout grooming. And that is exactly what ECA Digital is trying to prevent, where children and adolescents will not be exposed to grooming or social or sexual violence. But you may have a bad practices of biometric data, which may end up being a way to lead to future rights violations. Let alone that many companies are being criticized for suffering safety incidents by biometric data informations and IOTs that which suffered unsanctioned by the Spanish agency data protection, in that driver that would verify the child face. If they look like an adolescent, that would be 12 or maybe 16 years of age. And how can verification and assurance solutions and age estimates by physical characteristics should be very rigorous in the minimal time of that data usage. And if we suspect of any secondary use of that information as a commercial exploitation, that has to be severely punished. And that is aligned to the technical documents designed by W3C, where verifiable credentials should be technologies and protocols based on privacy by design, where the issuer will not disclose the child date of birth. That has to be done by disclosure, and then they will decide what can and what cannot be done, and that will need additional awareness by the community. And one final aspect here to close my talk is a document that we find at W3C. W3C has a chapter about privacy, chapter 8, which talks about data mining of commercial exploitations of those who store verifiable credentials. And there is an urgent risk where large big techs, as they don't have any legal ceiling as how they will manage credentials flow, they will add analysis about that commercial information based on large populational areas in economic sectors, and they will end up labeling that information as a strategic information to be explored. And this is part of our debate. If we stick to the personal identifiable information and individual privacy, we'll never be able to solve the problem, as that is a problem that tackle upon a collective of personal data concern, which is aligned to the reasoning of the legal framework. Telco, they cannot do age inspection. They cannot go beyond what they are entitled to do. Google, Amazon, and others, which are managing verifiable credentials flows on a larger scale, they cannot at all explore aggregated data and the information produced by the holders of personal data, even though you do not produce a re-identification of each one of the individuals. The Justice Committee has approved a norm about the application of LGPD, even though we have anonymous data. That has to do with the state of art of the whole discussion. And let me go back to the Australian document, which became a reference to help us to understand what can go wrong, as they have a well-done pilot where they documented a risk-based model, and as they call that, as a succession of information, which is not in the decree, but which is at ANPD guidelines. Companies, they don't have to hire a third part to retain the documents or biometric analysis. You have to fully understand what your service is, and if you can use less inclusive information. Now I have some 6 final questions to conclude. How can we audit proportionality if we don't have the source code of providers, if ANPD will apply open source by design, and that is connected to the LGPD principles? How can we avoid that regulatory punishments already identified by Australia, and how to do that by default in Brazil? How can we demand a functional separation of data architectures so we are not going to mix up customers with different structures that will be audited one by one? How can we investigate that profile, user's profile in the age assurance during the process of issuers? We also have to set a differentiation between different operational systems such as iOS, Debian, Linux, and other free software services. And how can we categorize the illegal retention of biometric data? That's quite a lot for ANPD to cover, and that is just the beginning of a discussion, and it will take years to reach maturation in age assurance and verification. Thank you. Thank you, Rafael. We have several challenges, and it's so important to address all of them in this discussion on verifiable credentials. You end up answering a question that we got at YouTube. How can we guarantee different digital wallets to guarantee if users are over 18? Victor had to leave the premises before we closed the session, and now we have time for 2 questions only. And the first one is it possible to have age verification model which would be acceptable globally, or that has to be applied locally only? Yes, we have to understand verifiable credentials both in the domestic and international markets. That's why we have international speakers to also give their opinion. We have time for one more question, and then you may answer and also proceed to your closing remarks, please. Please be brief on your answers. The game industry is a sector which is already talking to the different marketplaces and pornography. WhatsApp and Telegram, are they also included into that discussion? Should they also demand a verifiable credential? And my question has to do with all these industries, that they are a regulated industry such as gaming and others. And maybe people will end up sharing a content over WhatsApp without inspection, or even AI content. You may generate deep fakes, pornography, violence. How can you inspect that? And by doing it, we would end up checking private conversations, private chats. Today, the law says that if you are under 18, you cannot have a WhatsApp account. How do you see that? How can we prevent a flow and even get into a much worse situation? The other question, and then we wrap up with the answers. Thank you for this panel. And I have a question addressed to ANPD. For those who are implementing age assurance projects, ANPD gave us some sort of guidance and clarity in a more abstracted manner. But I guess we have to get adapted to specific conditions. What do I mean by that exactly? you have to consider data retention for inspection, and the more data you hold, the greater will be privacy issues, and that is same as a trade-off. And those that have to adapt to that, the question is, for how long should I store it? What can I store? What I have to get rid of? We are not still quite there in the discussion, but I would like to have an idea at least. When are we going to get clear information in that sense? Well, my boss has a question. I have to open an exception to him. Forgive me. And that's the last question, okay? Thank you, Bia. You were very wise to let me ask this final question. And my question to Enya is, does ECA Digital foresee any specific time to guarantee accessibility to people with special needs? We have 14 million people in Brazil with special needs, and as those services will be applied by third parties and not for services suppliers, do you foresee that people with the special needs, being physical or not, will they have guaranteed access to those assurance methodologies? Thank you. Okay, Miriam, you can start. The first question has to do with interpersonal communication apps, such as WhatsApp. ECA Digital defines social media by internet applications which aims to share and disseminate different opinions to users blah blah in one single platform by connected accounts or accessible in such a way that will allow connections among users, and that does not apply to interpersonal apps, although there are some that they are halfway. They are not really interpersonal, but they belong to large groups anyway. WhatsApp and other apps like that, they are under eco digital perspectives. WhatsApp, if I'm not wrong, establishes 14 years of age as the minimum age to download the app, and it's up to parents to allow, and parental supervision should be taken into account, not to get rid of some users control. And there are apps that before were considered end-to-end, and now they are closer to massive communications. Second questions, more concrete parameters to developers and tools for age verifications. Not all questions have been answered, and we have to understand that ANPD, together with you all, we are learning. The legislation has just passed after 6 months, and that should be taken within 1 year of a vacatio legs. And we have to have a robust understanding. That's why we start by dealing with the more abstract principles throughout a public debate, where we'll be able to develop to more concrete principles. But I have to be honest, I don't know if we are going to reach a level where we are going to say this one yes, the other one no, or if we are going to study case by case. After all, digital players will be the ones to decide if that is in compliance or not to the ANPD parameters, such as privacy, proportionality, inclusion, accuracy. These are parameters that they are related to some level of abstraction. And topics like that, they have to consider risk assessment, context, and to relate that type of action to each one of those concrete cases. So we are on the way, and you are all invited to participate at our build-up process. As to accessibility to those with special needs, that has to be considered. And we are doing that at ANPD, where inclusion and non-discrimination is part of our principles. I understand there are different challenges for people with cognitive, motor, or physical needs or disabilities, and we cannot exclude this relevant share of our population, and that may become a relevant technical challenge. I thank you all for the participation, and I am very happy to be part of this panel, and I invite you all to participate at our public consultation process. Let me try to answer the remote questions. Global versus local. As Bia said, this is indeed a challenge, and this workshop is trying to address that difference. Yes, we may think about such an integration, but that will require different demands and what will be the technical aspects to be deployed. And from a regulatory aspect, we have to understand what are the different demands in each one of the scenarios. We should have a better dimension about a full interoperability, and there will be solutions that will work locally and not globally. But that is still a field which is trying to better understand what has already been done internationally so we can learn from their experiences. And by that I mean Australia, UK, they have different legislations and different regulatory uh, spheres. What were the good experiences, what were not so good, and how can we benefit from those and not try to reinvent the wheel unnecessarily. Now, answering to Wagner, they in one of the articles they mentioned the duty of observations for take into account people with special needs. We have to protect this share of the populations. We have not just principles, but we have duties and responsibilities, and include all these share of the population as part of the ecosystem. I thank you all for your participation, and I am at your disposal to keep on disseminating that information. And we cannot just have that information restricted to a certain group of people, but rather to become a much larger debate to be discussed at schools, family members, and about the future pathways to be taken. We don't want to let the impression that this is something imposed and which will end up. It's up to us, it's our duty to protect those children and adolescents.
Well, two quick comments. I think you're right about your reflection. The more you aim at social media and you focus on Discord or Roblox or platforms that look like a community or for the circulation of content, the more private messaging companies will say that this is not what we are, and they'll try to build this bypass. So maybe we should just use the understanding of what is probable access and use that interpretation more rigorously. So to qualify how easy it is to access and the level of risk presented by that type of application. That will take some time to be used, but I believe that this is one of the most intellectually challenging topics in the upcoming years that will lead to interesting applications, because that's the basis of the definition of the application of the law, about the provocation, about how to build better best practices on age verification, facial recognition. I think that LGPD, our data protection law in Brazil, was designed thinking about a interesting regulation model in which the state is incapable of providing all solutions. So it's a theory that thinks of co-regulation, and the AI law is also being designed like that. And from this meeting, maybe we can create a forum of best practices of the with W3C community, with SERPRO, Data Prev, ATAI. So with and then with recommendations. So how can we do an age token that can be adopted as a standard? That's a possibility. The core regulation model is about this. So we need to make the best of the entrepreneurship in social and legal innovation of various segments in society and not waiting just for the ANPD to take the first move. So that's the beauty of the co-regulation model. We shouldn't wait for the all-powerful state to solve all our problems because it won't. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank once again our panelists for their participation as well as our audience. Presentations will be provided at the website of our meeting. Thank you. We would like to thank the participants of this panel and also Beatriz Rocha, the moderator of this panel. So now let's take the official picture for this panel. Once again, thank you for your participation. Now we're going to have a lunch break. We ask you to please be back at 1:30. Thank you very much and wish you a good